Welcome to the Heat of Command podcast, Mastering the Art of Fire Service Leadership,
where we, your hosts, aim to teach you how to use introspection and self-reflection to be your most authentic, genuine self, leader, and human being.
And now, here are your hosts. This is Kyle Matusik.
And Kerry Henderson. Thanks for joining. Hey, everybody, and I hope you had a great weekend. It is beautiful here in Virginia. We are finally reaching summer-like temperatures, and it is making me happy. Last week, our episode on therapy for first responders and how it relates to leadership was one of my favorites to record. It was therapeutic to me. It just felt good to kind of share the story and the journey and how much it's helped me. And I love always hearing your thoughts on that, Kyle, and how direct you are. Everybody needs therapy.
Yeah.
Have an issue? Go to therapy. You're a jerk? Go to therapy. I love it.
Right. You know, it's funny. I mean, just a real quick story, like how, and I don't know if I brought this up, how my wife and I ended up in the current church we are. There was a pastor doing a sermon for a firefighter who had committed suicide. And I saw a portion of it. And he said, for all you first responders, you firefighters, police officers, EMTs, nurses, etc., you all need help. You don't think you do, but you do. And I was like, man, we need to start being that blunt about things. Like, it's okay to have this talk. You know, we go to the gym, we work out to stay physically fit. And it's like, what are we doing for our brains? You know, and our industry is just so different and how we operate and the things that we do. And it's like, I think we're there where we have to be that blunt about it.
Yeah, I do too. That's hard for me sometimes. I always feel like I can have hard conversations with people about everything else, but when it comes to that, sometimes that's hard.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes that's where the challenge lies for me. You know, you go through this, and, you know, we have our stories and our backgrounds and what we went through. And it's like, you want everybody to have and take that journey that you did because you experience the before and after and how you just look at life, how your values change and your priorities change. And it's just brought so much more value into my life, like personally, like who am I? And you want that for everybody. And that's a tall order, right? Because it's easy. We can sit here and be vulnerable with each other and have conversations and it's cool and it's a great outlet for me. But sometimes when you go and start doing that on a regular basis within your workplace or wherever, that could be exhausting, especially when people just constantly are like misunderstanding what you're trying to say or get by, or they just don't want to hear it. And like, I get it, totally get it. So it's like, where's the balance now, right? Where are the boundaries? Where's the balance on where you can push versus where you can't? And then, you know, some relationships just have to stay surface level and it's too exhausting to try and get that outcome. But that's where like our industry, I think, is just so different because we live with each other, the things we see, the things we do. It's like, we need this. And you know, my hope is that for most people listening here and people I interact with, like, take the journey.
Yeah. I don't know about for you, but for me, finding the therapist I have now and doing the work that I'm doing now, it makes things so much clearer. Like decisions are easier and like my world just feels it's a clearer picture. It's easier to navigate so much in my life and to make decisions for my personal life, my work life. I just love it.
Yeah, it's just that outlook changes, you know, and it's like, what's really important here, and, you know, this game we call life and how short it is and what really matters, and bringing all those things to the forefront. And I you know, that's the interesting and the fun part of the entire journey and what it's all about and how on a greater scale we can get more people there. And I look at our industry and the personalities, right? The personalities that come into a job like this are challenging personalities for the most part. And a lot of times personalities clash. And that's why it's like the bluntness of like, you need therapy, because sometimes just having a personal conversation with a coworker or somebody within your organization, like, they don't want to hear it from you, you know? And so having that third party, that outsider that knows nothing about you, nothing about your organization, understands the industry, as somebody who can be that, you know, voice of reason, give you tools to succeed, listen, whether you're right or wrong, you know, they're not there to judge. And, you know, because a lot of times there's a lot of judgment in our world today. So to have that third party person, I think, is just so important for so many of the personalities that we find in our industry.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I love that we did a whole episode on like finding compassion for yourself, doing the hard work for yourself, the introspection, self-reflection and through therapy and how that makes you a better leader. But that's only half of it, right? That's your personal journey and your personal work. So then what do you do with it? You then the next step is taking care of others and learning about others and the compassion and empathy leadership model that we love and love to talk about. So today, let's talk about that next part. Let's do some deeper stuff because we've talked about it. We've done an episode about the blame game, and I think that kind of comes into play here. Authenticity and how you find that, and values and how you find that. But really, what are some ways, and how do you really take care of the people that you're responsible for or the people that are your coworkers or your supervisors? How do you show empathy and compassion as a leader? So let's talk about that today for our listeners.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, and the first and foremost, we have to put this out there. Before you really can have that compassion and empathy for others, you have to have it for yourself, and you have to understand what that is what that looks like, what that feels like. And if you missed last episode, go listen to that one because that's how you get there, right? And so that's so important because if we try to have that compassion and empathy and we don't have it for ourselves, then it just comes off as not genuine, right? Not authentic. And it's something that you learned. It's something that you heard on the Heat of Command podcast and you're going to try and implement, right? So it's beyond that. It's okay. We've done the work on ourselves. We've looked in the mirror. We took an introspective journey. I have this different outlook, and how do I bring it to the forefront now? And having that for other people is where it has to start.
Yeah, and it's also worth talking about how do you do it in an industry like ours? Because I think, I've talked about, I'm a people pleaser, but I've always been very empathetic. That's been my personality since I was little. But to do it in an industry like ours, it's hard sometimes because we want to blame other people and we want to discipline them and hold them accountable. And it doesn't always look compassionate for us. So how do you do it in a way that works for us? Because you absolutely can. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful when it works.
Yeah. There's, I may have talked about her before, but Dr. Cody Todd, she's a clinician out here in Illinois, and she's done a lot of work in our industry. And I would highly recommend everybody follow her on Facebook. And lately she's been putting up a lot of truth bombs, which have been awesome. And she most recently talked about like sympathy and empathy, and sympathy. There's a picture, and I'll share it up on our Facebook of a guy hanging off an edge, and somebody's there saying, "Hang in there, it gets better." And the dude's just hanging there saying, "F you," like I need help, and like we're just standoffish. And yeah, it'll get better, it'll get better. But empathy, on the other hand, would be scooting to that edge, pulling that person up, and asking what they need. And it's either do it in either order, ask what they need, then go and help them, and that does take energy and effort, but that's what people need, and in that 97%, she said, of the time that's what we need, just what do you need? What can I help? And, be that helping hand and getting there instead of just saying, hey, it gets better. Or, one of my favorites that we hear is, especially for people around us, especially if, there's a level of toxicity or a personality that just isn't meshing. It's like, well, that's who they are. And it's like, well, no. I understand that, but like, how do you help another person through, that situation or any situation? When we look at empathy and compassion, it's more action versus sympathy is just, essentially words, right?
Yeah. And I think of sympathy too as you feel bad for someone, you feel bad for the position they're in or what they're going through, but you don't and I'm not saying we need to internalize other people's emotions, but there's no like, you just feel bad for them and you're not willing to like do anything or take any action for them. So,
Yeah. And, a lot of times it's just people. And one thing that I learned, through therapy and going through stuff, and when we look at having compassion and empathy for others, like initially you're kind of judging yourself and your whole situation, your background, the things that you've been through and experienced, and you like rate them and you compare them, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, they got it so much worse, or there's so many more people out there who have it worse. And yes, there always is going to be, but that doesn't take away from the struggles that you have or other people have. So I think we have to stop. Like, if we want to start having compassion and empathy for others, the first thing you got to do is you got to stop that judgment. We got to stop this hierarchy of, well, that's bad enough, so I'm going to be there for you, brother, right? Versus no, that doesn't meet my scale of me wanting to be there for you. It's like we pick and choose where we think it's okay, or it's gotten to a level bad enough for us to start having that compassion and empathy. And it's like, again, we need to stop doing that. And on a daily basis, in the day to day, the mundane, how do we have compassion and empathy for everybody? And stop with the hierarchy and stopping with the judging of, well, that's not too bad. So yeah, just rub some sand on it and move on. Or we're not even going to discuss it. But then it gets to a level where it's like, okay, now I'm going to be there for you, And so like step one, let's get rid of that. Like that's, an easy place to start.
Yeah. And judgment, man, gosh, are we like the judgiest people
Sure.
in our
Right.
industry? We're
Yeah.
so judgy. I can just think of so many examples of, instead of helping someone, we just judge them. We're like, well, and we like to assume why someone has had the behavior or the performance issue or the mental health issue or the whatever it is going on, the attitude or whatever. And in our judging, we're we're assuming, we're making a lot of assumptions. So
Yep.
like, I'm sure that they did this because blah blah blah. And it's like, well, if I was more empathetic, so this is where it comes in. If I was more empathetic, instead of making a judgment and assigning some thought to it, because I think they did it because of this, or I'm sure that they did it because they're a terrible human or they suck at the job or whatever it is, you you start to put something into action and you really find out what is going on, and like, what, why did you make that decision, or what's happening? Or if you're not ready to talk to them, like, but y- finding out, that's the first thing I always want to know when someone's in trouble. What made them do that? Or someone that's struggling at work, what is making that? Why are they that way? And sometimes I can't figure it out, right? Because they need a therapist,
Right.
because we
Yeah.
talked about that in last episode. But it's the willingness to, like you said, you have the superpower now, and you can look at people and know now, like, they need a therapist or they've got this issue or whatever. But sometimes it's not mental health stuff. Sometimes it's performance stuff. But now it's like, I look at somebody and I say, what is making them? Why isn't it clicking for them? Or why are they still making these mistakes? What can I support them with? How do I support them? It's instead of that mindset of, I need to write them up to make them not do this behavior again. Well, that's not going to work. Like, there is absolutely times where we are documenting and we are disciplining, for documentation purposes, but that's not the way to change the behavior. That's not the compassionate, empathetic way to change the behavior.
Yeah, and sometimes to weed through that, right, is challenging in and of itself. Like, how do you get to the bottom of a performance issue or a personality issue or whatever with somebody and have that conversation, have that hard conversation? Like, initially, sure, it's got to relate to standards and policies, but then the why underneath it all, and sometimes to get that out of people, especially coworkers, is extremely challenging. And it's like, how then do we open up avenues to where people can go talk to somebody to maybe rid themselves of some of these beliefs? Because a lot of times these internal beliefs come from something, right? And a lot of times it's feelings of shame and not feeling good enough. Like, a lot of the books I've read, a lot of things I've learned, like, it really comes down a lot of times to those two things, right? Shame and not feeling good enough. So what behaviors are in place and why don't they feel good enough? Why do they feel shame? Why are they scared to make a mistake during training? Like, have we developed bad environments where people become scared to perform because they're afraid to mess up because then they're not going to be good enough, and then they're going to be so hard on themselves, and then it's just like this cyclical problem that is generated and can stay with people their entire careers, where they never have the confidence because of something that happened 30 years ago, and we never became attuned to, hey, we need to motivate or empower or encourage in a different way, or this is how we need to approach training, or this is what we need to do. We need to boost our people up instead of shooting them down. And I get, one of the things that I'll hear all the time, well, we need to be tough and we need to do this because of the job that we do. And we're absolutely like, I wholeheartedly agree with that. But our approach is not through shame and fear, right? It has to take that compassionate approach to, we all got stories. Everybody you see has got a story. And like, sometimes we have to work to get to the bottom of that, or have avenues that allow people to start expressing that and understanding that about themselves.
Yeah, I've seen so many people in our industry that have had that lack of confidence
Oh
for
yeah.
whatever reason it is, and it's they're it's is it the cart or the horse or the chicken or the egg? Does their lack of confidence cause their performance issues, or is their performance issues causing their confidence issues? And how do you break that? Where do you start with that? It's people have to have confidence to perform and to make decisions, because you're a terrible decision maker if you don't have any confidence. I see that pretty regularly, in the fire service. But if your performance isn't there, you can't have confidence, right? You can't be confident in yourself if your performance isn't great. So it's this, where do we start and really hit it home? It's both. You got to do both.
Yeah, and you really develop those skills, again, listening to the last episode, like that's where you start to develop those skills. Because we can sit here all day, me and you, and talk about this stuff, and this is what it takes, and this is how you have to approach it and move forward. But like, to really understand what that feels like and that looks like you have to understand that on yourself first in order to have that for others. So you can understand, like, man, they got a story. Why aren't they confident? Why are they second guessing? Has our training been in a way that degrades people instead of lifting them up? Have we made it a scary environment for them to make a mistake during training? And a lot of times, like, you see some of the cultures and the traditions and all that stuff, and I can tell you, yes, right? Like, yes, we have made it that way. And it's like, we need to change. We need to change. And when we're looking at those things and having that empathy and compassion for others, it's like, look at what you have done or not done to cause, like, answer that question. You see something in your organization. What have you done or not done to cause the current state of affairs? Like, that is an empathetic approach. Like, where is my responsibility and how can I fix that to better other people around me?
Yeah, two things come to mind, and I'm going to talk about one, and then I'm going to forget the other. So we'll see how this goes. The first, I've already forgotten one. The first thing is, I see a lot of times in fire academies or in company training in the past, and sometimes still, where we put together some training scenario, and it's supposed to be training, which is practice. That's where you come and screw up. But we treat them like evaluations, and we treat them, and you run through this whole thing. Like, let's say it's burns, it's live burns for recruits, or let's say it's company evolutions for incumbents. They run through the whole thing, they screw it all up. We don't stop them. We don't say anything in the middle of it like, "Hey, stop right here. Try this instead," or "Here, stop right here." Like, "Nope, you're not going in the direction this needs to be going in." We let them run through the whole thing like it's some assessment or evaluation, and at the end we give them feedback like a grade. And so it does feel like we're setting them up because we don't want them to make a mistake. But that's not a training. That's not practice. That's so separate those, like, evaluations for, like, when we run captains assessments or battalion chiefs assessments for promotion, those are assessments. That's where you come. We don't want you to make a mistake. We want you to run through the whole thing and you're graded on it, right? Totally different than coming for company evolutions where we're, running you through some scenario where we want you to practice and screw it up and try something different. Or, hey, can I try this instead? Or let me run through it this way one time. And I got this new whatever I want to try out. Or especially for the recruits too. They come to live burns. It's the first time they've ever done a live burn. And we, like, let them run through the whole thing and they screw it all up. And then we yell at them. And it's like, That was the first time they ever did it. It should have been a it should be them learning how to do the thing in the live fire. Like, you can't always stop them in the middle of live burns, but you can not let it go so, you know, off the rails that you learn nothing and then you just come out and yell at them for screwing it all up. Right? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's where you destroy confidence, right? That's
Yes,
where you get
100%.
people to start second guessing. And we never got to the bottom of why it was happening, and that's where you start creating this culture is just so negative. And, one of the things you mentioned was, we go after the drill or the training and we talk about what went wrong and this and that. And then it's in front of everybody.
Yeah.
And like some of those things don't need to be talked about in front of everybody. And it's not that that's necessarily a bad thing. Like if everybody can learn something from it, cool. Yeah, absolutely. Or can we do it in a way that is not shameful? Hey, let's try this. Hey, let's run through this again and do it this way. I want you to try this approach. I'm not saying it's better, show some humility there. Like my way might not be the best way, but let's just try it. I want to see how it goes. I want to see how you perform with this tactic or this way of doing something and approach it that way. So we're not shaming in front of, you know, many
Something that
people.
I have found that seems to work pretty good is, and this is for EMS scenarios and for fire scenarios for company training and for recruits and recruit school, is always starting out. So like when you're doing your little huddle after whatever scenario is, all right, so let's say Kyle, your company comes down. I say, hey, Lieutenant, what did you see? What did you think? Like what did you think went well? Would you have done anything different? Because how much easier is it for me? Because you already know if you've screwed it up, right? I already know. Like if I screwed that up or I would have done something, I already know that. You telling me that is worse, right? So I can say it, then I can own it and say, man, I totally screwed that up. I didn't see whatever. I would have done this different. My radio traffic sucked. We didn't get everything searched, whatever it is. You get to say it instead of someone, you know, giving you that negative feedback. And then the training staff or whoever goes, yeah, we saw that, but you're exactly right. Like, hey, let's try it again. And and I like to always say is what we've seen that's worked well from other, hey, we saw this work well, or try it this way, like you said, but let the first part of every like critique, if you want to call it that, I'd like a different word, but like review or whatever at the end of scenarios is to let the people involved provide the feedback first because they almost always know when they've screwed it up. They say it and you don't even have to, which it makes it much more neutral and not so negative.
Yeah, and then there's ownership behind it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. There's ownership.
And that in and of itself builds a level of confidence
Yeah.
and encourages people to voice their opinion and give their thoughts on things, which is very important.
Yeah. Cause instead if you're just sitting there waiting the whole time for somebody to call you out on what you already know you screwed up on, it's just, that doesn't feel great.
No.
So, and the other thing I was going to say, and I didn't forget, is you to have. So I've seen this go both ways, and especially in recruit school, is really really high expectations, which I have really really high expectations. But you can't have high expectations and not any compassion and empathy and be willing to get deep with people, right? That just makes you that's where you're killing people's confidence is you come in there and expect people to, you know, kill it every single day and you have no space for compassion or empathy with them. That's where you're losing your people are losing confidence. They're afraid to make mistakes. They're afraid to come to you with stuff that's going on or mistakes or own up to anything. There's no accountability, personal accountability. But if you can balance really high expectation with a ton of compassion and empathy, then you can make that work without killing people's confidence and breaking them completely down where they just, they're so afraid to make a mistake.
Yeah, I think that goes very closely with, one thing I think about is a lot of times we hear, well, this is what I went through, or this is what I did, or this is what happened to me. This is the way it always was. And, sometimes we have to start asking ourselves, like, is this the best way? And a lot of times I think the answer to that is no. But then what is, and that's where the compassion and empathy fall in. When we can ask that question, well, what is the best way to approach XYZ training, responses, whatever? And it's like, I know what I went through. I know my experiences. I don't believe that was the best way. So going forward, what is the best way and how do you implement those? So we have to start examining the things that happened to us through our careers, or the way that we were trained, or how we were brought up, or the way you were treated as a probie versus today, and ask yourself, just because you went through it and it was done to you, we need to stop with the I have to continue it on, because a
Yeah.
lot of times what we see is, as organizations progress and people within organizations progress, all they are products of the things that they experienced. All they are products of the people that were in charge of them. And they're just repeating cycles, and they're not good, and you have to pull yourself out of that, bring that individuality, bring that authentic self to the table, and really examine things in a new light. Now, you're going to have successes and failures through that. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be challenges, especially when you're in an environment that may not be encouraging and still uses that shame and fear. So, but that's what it's going to take. The same old has to stop. And every time somebody advances up and moves forward, it should never replicate the things that you experienced or saw, or the way you were led. Now, I'm not saying all that is bad. We can take pieces of the good stuff that we see throughout our careers and make it into ourselves. But we need that individuality. We need to have this open mind on looking and examining things differently. So again, we can recruit, we can retain, we can train, and we can meet our goals of what we do and what we're set out to do. And that's save lives, respond to emergencies, take care of our people, and take care of the people that trust us to do the job. So it's having those high standards, but just being able to examine things and really look at things from a different angle.
Yeah. And I also think we don't do a great job of providing regular feedback, and feedback in a way that people can receive it, because, we want people to be high performers, and we want them to have really good confidence and all of that. But I feel like sometimes we don't give enough feedback. And the feedback that we do give is not always delivered in a great way. So being comfortable giving feedback regularly, good feedback, positive feedback, feedback for improvement, so that it's not this surprise when you shouldn't get pulled into the captain's office and it's this surprise that you've been screwing up for 6 months, right? And now your confidence is completely shot because you thought you were doing all right. So I think being empathetic and compassionate is providing positive and negative feedback or corrective feedback all the time, so that it's not this like blow to the stomach and it kills your confidence. And it's at the same time, on the reverse, if you're not getting any feedback, how do I develop more confidence that I'm actually doing anything right? So my confidence, it ebbs and flows, but that is something I'm working on in therapy, is my, you know, like I get this like imposter syndrome thing, everybody talks about that, but it's like, am I good enough to be doing what I'm doing? And that's deep seated,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
that's super deep seated, and working through that, man, it's a constant battle. But if we can help our folks, stay ahead of that, man, the next generation they'd be rock stars.
Right. Establish a culture where people won't feel like that, right?
Yeah.
Like that should be the goal. And it's, early on in my career, I remember, we've talked about how people go to a class and then they come back and I don't know. I don't know what that
There's
was.
like a
Right.
bubble over you.
Yeah.
Our listeners are like, what's going on?
They come back from a class and they start, being something that they learned in class. And one of the ones that I always remember is like, everything when you're counseling somebody or someone, say it's a sandwich. You start with a compliment, tell them the bad news, and then end with a compliment. It's like,
Bleh.
come on,
That's the
like,
shit sandwich model. That's what I
right?
call it.
Yeah,
It's
terrible, right?
yeah.
But it's that constant, feedback, and it allows room for goal setting and putting people on a right track. And you want to do this, follow me, I'll get you there. Cool, like let's do it. But it's sometimes these cultures just don't allow for that kind of room, and we just stick to stuff that we learned in a book, and that's where when we start talking emotions and all this stuff, like there's not a one size fits all. And that's the struggle, right? Because we want a recipe. We want step 1, step 2, step 3, do this, that, and the other thing, and you're good. But this stuff and leading people is not that. It is the complete opposite. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of hard conversations. And it takes, again, successes and failures, trials, and, more failures. But that's how you're going to get it. And having open, honest conversation, even as a boss or a leader, like saying, "Hey, I messed up.
Yeah.
I know you came to me with these goals, and I thought this was going to be a good path, but you know what? I made a huge mistake, and we shouldn't be doing this. I want you to try this instead. Or what do you think? Like, take some ownership in it." But I think having that ability to say, "Hey, I messed up, and we need to re-examine this, and I'm going to sit here and we're gonna figure this out together." There's a lot of value there, and that it starts to become personal when we start having these personal relationships is so important in our industry.
Yeah, and if you as a leader are letting people down, or even if you're going through something, because we cannot always be 100% all the time. It's impossible. So if you as a leader are going through something, your people know it. So be honest and say, "Hey guys, I know that I am not 100% right now. And I appreciate your grace. And I'm doing the best I can right now. But I just want to be open about that." So, because if not, people go back to that judgment thing and making assumptions of, "Oh, she's just, what's happened to her? Why isn't she what she was? And she's slipping. Oh, she's not great anymore. She, whatever." Just be honest. "Hey, I got stuff going on and it's affecting me. But here's what I'm doing to make sure that we stay safe and that I'm doing what you need me to do," and all that. So,
Yeah,
all
because
that constant communication.
your motivation and all that, it's going to ebb and flow during your career, right? There's going to be really good times in your careers and times where you're struggling through your career for numerous reasons, right? And if we have that culture where that's okay to be,
Yeah.
is I think a lot of value, because 20, 30-year career, you're going to have a lot of that, and it's how do we back our people up?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it gives people hope and it gives people confidence to see a leader go through something, be humble about it, be open and about it, and to see people give them grace. And then they come back, you come out on the other side and you're good again. So the people after you or around you go, "Oh, it's okay. It's okay for me. I don't need to hide whatever. They're going to support me through it. They're going to give me some grace and a little less judgment. And then I'm going to come out on the other side and, work on it."
Yeah, and with that, I think a lot of times too, when you enter our career, you get pegged with a personality and a certain way right away, and that usually sticks with you your entire career, regardless of any changes that you make or growth that you make in your life. You are always pegged a certain way. And that's, it goes back to that judgment and that blame thing. And it's just something that we got to get away from and allow an environment for people to grow and understand that the 22-year-old that got hired is not the 35-year-old that you see today, you know? And I mean, just in that, we can have a lot more compassion and empathy for people like, hey, they have grown, awesome job. How can I help you continue to do that? What struggles are you having during your growth? My wife just posted up something that Jelly Roll, that country
Yeah.
singer was
Uh-huh.
saying. He said something along, there's a reason why the windshield is a lot bigger than the rear view mirror. It's looking ahead, and growth is so important, and being in environments that allow room for growth. So we, in our industry, we have to allow those environments for growth. And that's where the compassion and empathy lies, is in that environment. So people can learn, so people can grow, and we can just raise those standards constantly.
Yeah. That's beautifully said. So I think we wrap this one up because this is some good stuff for people to kind of marinate in. But I would like us, and if our listeners are interested, to do an episode solely on how do you make sure you are hiring and promoting people that have empathy and compassion, that as a skill set, or as part of their being. How do you make sure? 'Cause that's incredibly hard to you can't really teach that. You can teach people like ways to utilize it, but how do you make sure you're hiring and promoting people that already have those qualities? So we'll expand on this
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one. And that's a challenging, and it all goes back to, it goes back to you as the individual, right? And taking that journey and that introspective look so you know what it feels like, what it looks like, and then you can start seeing it in others and ensuring that, you're promoting what we want promoted and the characteristics there.
Goodly. Yep.
As we wrap up another episode, this has been Kyle
And Kerry,
from the Heat of Command podcast.
thank you, as always, for listening. Please make sure to follow and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And as always, we love the feedback. Keep it coming.
See you next time.